Well, for Americans, the July 4th holiday weekend usually means big celebrations and an address from the president. And while that did happen, things are pretty different this year. The U.S. is seeing a huge surge in COVID-19 cases, and anti-Black racism protests have swept across the country. Paul Hunter joins us now from Washington with more. So, Paul, Donald Trump called last night in his Salute to America speech. He called out a whole bunch of people. So tell us what he had to say.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, Donald Trump is telling Americans there is an enemy within, and it is other Americans, what he calls the radical left and, the news media, and for that matter, those who are tearing down statues, many of which commemorate people who profited off slavery. In Trump's view, all of those Americans are the enemy. For context, Trump is tanking in public opinion polls these days, and this certainly had the feel of a campaign-style speech, and if so, could be previewing that he's banking divisive language will fire up enough Americans who see things the same way to get out and vote for him. It's a gambit and, would say many, an ugly one, but it is one Trump seems to be taking. Here is a bit of that speech last evening.
We are now in the process of defeating the radical left, the Marxists, the anarchists, the agitators, the looters, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing. We will never allow an angry mob to tear down our statues, erase our history, indoctrinate our children, or trample on our freedoms.
As he spoke, by the way, Black Lives Matter demonstrators were marching through the streets of Washington, and just a block north of the White House, they burned an American flag and chanted, "Refuse fascism." In Baltimore, not far from here, protesters were tearing down a statue of Christopher Columbus and tossing it into the harbor. In other words, the fury outside the now fenced-off White House continues.
Trump is also coming under fire, Paul, for statements he made about COVID-19. What did he say there? Yeah,
as he spoke to a crowd on the White House lawn of mostly non-mask wearing invited guests, just under 40,000 more Americans tested, or just under 50,000 rather, tested positive for COVID yesterday. It was the first time in a few days that, in fact, the number had dipped below 50,000. Trump made little mention of COVID in the speech yesterday, but the bit that he did say was immediately called out as not only false information, but potentially dangerous in the middle of this pandemic in which the U.S. leads the world in infections and deaths by a long shot, and at a time when infections are spiking again, especially in the U.S. South. He downplayed it. I'm going to play you two clips here. The first is what Trump said, which does not jibe with anything the medical community has said. And then a clip from the mayor of Austin, Texas, which is one of the states now seeing COVID spikes. First, though, here's Trump.
Now we have tested almost 40 million people. By so doing, we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
It makes me angry. I understand he has a tough job, but it is dangerous not to be sending a clear message to Americans, to folks in my town. We have the July 4th weekend, and we need everybody wearing masks. And when they start hearing that kind of ambiguous message coming out of Washington, there are more and more people that won't wear masks, that won't social distance, that won't do what it takes to keep a community safe.
Worth noting that the head of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, who effectively works for Donald Trump, was interviewed as well today and asked what he thought of Trump's comments and the potentially dangerous inference people could draw from them to let their guard down on COVID. His answer was that people should wear masks and keep physical distance from others. He made no comment on what the president said.
CBC's Paul Hunter in Washington. For more on Donald Trump's comments about COVID-19, we spoke with Dr. Isaac Bogosh. He's an infectious diseases specialist at Toronto General Hospital, and we asked for his reaction to Trump's claim that 99% of the cases are, quote, totally harmless.
It's really unfortunate to hear messaging like that, especially from senior political leadership. We know what this virus can do. We know how it can tear through communities if control efforts aren't in place. We know how deadly this can be in populations such as those over the age of 60 and others with underlying medical conditions. We've seen the death toll in places, even in Canada, when it tore through long-term care facilities. So being cavalier here is clearly not the right path forward. It will just result in an unacceptable number of cases and an unacceptable number of deaths. It's really unfortunate to see that, because we also look at the United States now and we can see just astronomical levels of infections and tremendous rates of infection. And of course, there's the high hit areas like Florida, Texas, Arizona, California. But if we even look beyond there, there's many, many other states that the numbers themselves might not be so impressive because they have smaller populations, but you just watch these graphs shoot upwards with in number of new cases per day and the percent of all tests done being positive. It's really unfortunate to see. And sadly, it's going to result in deaths that are largely preventable.